I have a half hour to talk to you about kettlebell training, so I cut it down as much as possible, focusing on the kettlebell swing as a foundation to a large amount of different kettlebell movements, and kettlebell swing being the most fundamental movement that's specific to kettlebells and not other types of equipment. So, Patrick, please go. A little bit of history behind kettlebells and how they got to be used in the US. They started being used in Russia in the 1700s to train the armed forces as basically just a cannonball with a metal handle welded to it. They were pretty heavy. They're measured in a system called POODs. Doug likes that word too. A POOD is, I believe, 2 kilograms. And this guy, Valery Fedorenko, moved to the US in 1919. 16 kilograms. So he moved to the US in 1999. He was one of the Russian kettlebell champions, and he started the World Kettlebell Club in 2006. So kettlebells have become pretty popular recently, especially in CrossFit, and I even assumed that they've been around for a long time, but they actually just started being used in the US. So the difference in using kettlebells as opposed to dumbbells or barbells, most of the movements that are kettlebell specific are highly efficient. So a kettlebell swing, the kettlebell is moving the entire time, unlike a bench press, for example, where you're stopping the weight in the middle of the movement, or even a squat, you have to stop and start the weight, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Kettlebells are just used a different way. They're really versatile, so as I'll show you in later slides, you can take pretty much any exercise that uses dumbbells and then use them with kettlebells, and in addition to the other things that are specific to kettlebells. A lot of functional movements can be done with kettlebells, so squats, farmer's carries, swings, things like that. They're ideal for Tabata training, so basically you can do short and intense intervals with heavy kettlebells and continuous movement, because Tabata training is 20 seconds of work, 10 seconds of rest, and you want something that's pretty intensive at 20 seconds. Kettlebell exercises are typically not done until failure, so like doing a 1 rep max or doing maximum amount of kettlebell swings, for example, and that's just something that's unique to kettlebells. The reps typically take longer and they're more complex, so as you'll see, there's a lot involved with kettlebell swings. Even those of you that work out at Body by Boards, we don't spend that much time really focusing on the details of kettlebell swings, but it is a complex movement, even more so than a lot of the other things that we do. So this is just kind of a joke, but you can do things like bicep curls and bench press and shoulder raises and isolation exercises with kettlebells, though that's typically not what they're used for, but it's just highlighting the versatility that I talked about. Yeah, I should know. That's not a real thing. It's what it's just kind of like proof of concept that you can do a lot of different things. All right. So kettlebell swing, as you can see this guy in like a basically 3-stage movement that we'll talk about later. You can do kettlebell swings for strength using higher weight, maybe doing 5 reps at a time or so. You can do kettlebell swings for endurance. Patrick was showing that he did kettlebell swings for 5 minutes, focusing on his heart rate, which is on the longer end of how long you typically want to do kettlebell swings. 5 minutes is a while if you hit the time. Core stability. So during the entire movement, since you're keeping tension on the kettlebell, it's really important that you keep your core tight and your entire body is stable. Cardio, Patrick kind of touched on that, and heart rate, and I'll show you some of the research that backs these things up as well. Grip strength, so any of you that did Thomas and I's workout last week with a million kettlebell swings and farmer's carries, you would know that your grip strength is really tired out. Hand-eye coordination, so because the kettlebell is moving around and you're swinging it, you can even do things where you're switching hands in the middle of the swing. You'll see why hand-eye coordination is really important for that. Power, so especially in your hips and being explosive in your hips, kettlebell swings can be a really great tool to train that. and overall balance. So I'll show you some lunging kettlebell exercises and one-handed kettlebell exercises where you're training off balance, and kettlebells are great for that. So there are two basic types of kettlebell swings. The one that started in Russia, just breaking the plane of your eyes, and then the American kettlebell swing, where you're going all the way overhead and having your ears break the plane of your arms. Both of them are correct. There are some people who will argue for which one is better, and I'm staying out of that argument. I'm just showing you both of them. And so we typically do the American swing as it's going through the full range of movement. And Patrick, can you show the next slide? And so here's a pretty popular CrossFit Journal article that was published on why they do the American kettlebell swing throughout full range of motion for people who have the mobility to do that. And basically the only argument against this is that some people might not have the shoulder mobility to go all the way overhead and keep their core tight while still doing the exercise correctly. But as with push-ups, squats, and deadlifts, going through the full range of motion is really important for using all of your muscles and what you're capable of. And so they argue if you have range of motion left in a swing, that you might as well use it. So we're going to go through a short progression. Originally I was going to have everyone do this, but I think that would take too much time. We don't have a lot of space and almost no one's wearing workout clothes. But so it basically starts with keeping your shoulder packed and locked in the socket, using your hips and isolating that through a hip hinge, and then getting into a good starting position. So I'm going to have Patrick and someone else volunteer. Who wants to volunteer? There you go, Jacob. Grace worked out a lot. So yeah, if you guys it's a little dark, but basically you guys should be able to see pretty well. If you can't see them doing something, just let me know. Coming up on the next slide. Boris, would you mind putting the picture? Oh yeah. So and then starting with just get you there. So this is just showing what's packed shoulder down and back, similar to in deadlifts and rowing and bent over rows. We talk about this a lot. Your shoulders down and back, as opposed to loose in the socket. So if you guys could both just Patrick.
So which one's the right one? Right or left?
So the correct way to keep your shoulder is on the left, with the shoulder down and back. Patrick will demonstrate this. It's actually pretty fun to try by yourself. So first he's going to have his shoulder not packed in the socket, and basically you see he's just like spaghetti right now. And then when he does keep his shoulder packed down and back, I can pick up his whole body, and it's basically he's not moving. So you don't want that movement throughout the swing, like you're pulling a lawnmower or something. Go to the next one. The hip hinge. So this is basically, you would do this if you're having problems using your hips to swing the kettlebell out, and if you're doing it more like a squat and a shoulder raise. So you guys can both get down and show this real quick. So let's do the one on the left, where you're laying down your back, feet on the ground, hands to the side, and just do 5 hip hinges, holding it at the top. And so next time you guys do kettlebell swings, if you do kettlebell swings, you might want to do this just to have a way of thinking about it in your mind, because this is the core part of the movement, using your hips. So now go back on your knees and do the one on the right with your arms out. So this is closer to what the actual hip movement would look like. And your hips during the kettlebell swings are moving forwards and backwards more than up and down. And that's the difference between a kettlebell swing and a squat. Hips are really important in both of those exercises. In a squat, you're moving your hips up and down for the most part. In a kettlebell swing, you're moving your hips forwards and backwards. So, next slide. So the starting position of a kettlebell swing, another way to think about it is if you're standing right in front of a wall. Jacob, you can do this too on the other side. So starting about where Patrick is, actually a little bit closer, touch the wall with your butt just by pushing it backwards. So stand up straight. Yeah, you can step forward a little bit. So if that's easy, step forward a few inches, push your butt backwards. There we go. Now a little bit farther. You'll get to a point where you start coming back on your heels as you push your butt back. So that's about your limit. And then that's the same way that you'll get into the starting position. So if you guys could each grab a kettlebell. And you're both going to face sideways towards the group as you're doing this because that's the best angle for them to view. So, yeah, both face the same way. How you're going to start is with a kettlebell about a foot in front of you, feet shoulder width apart, and then push your butt back as far as you can as you lean over, bending at your hips to grab the kettlebell. Keeping your back straight. Good. So that's the starting position for a kettlebell swing. The kettlebell is back just a little bit, and I see a lot of people who start with a kettlebell right here, and if you do that, to start it swinging, you have to kind of do a couple mini swings, but as you'll see, this makes it a lot easier, and it just becomes a 3-position movement. Good, Jacob's done this before. So just stop here for a second. The second position, without moving the kettlebell, you're just gonna move your hands between your legs like you're hiking a football. So hold it there without the kettlebell down. See, you can't do this with the kettlebell. So hold it between your legs, right here. And then the last position, you push your hips out, keeping tension on the kettlebell, and swing it just so you break eye level for now. We'll do the full range of motion after. So if you haven't done this before and you want to try it out, or even if you want to refine your technique, if you've been doing kettlebell swings for a while but you haven't learned the full progression of things, try them one at a time. So basically, you guys can both do this, starting from the kettlebell at the ground, do one swing, and then set it back down until it touches the ground and you release tension on the kettlebell, then do another one. Good. So starting with the kettlebell out in front of you also really forces you to bring it towards your body, between your legs, and keeping it high. So you want to try and keep it as far above your knees as you can. It might dip down below that plane, but for the most part, during the entire kettlebell swing, you guys can just do some continuously. Do about 10 to 20, and I'll show you. Yeah. So do continuous swings now, Jacob. So if you see, for the most part, it's staying above his knees. It's definitely not dipping too far below. So you can get up a little bit higher. Good. Yeah. So as it goes below your knees, you start putting more strain on your lower back, and you have to kind of reach out farther. Starting with it about a foot in front of you really helps avoid this. Good. So Patrick's got it. Jacob's got it. One of the cues to help fix that is to tap the zipper. So you want to kind of pretend like you're throwing the kettlebell into yourself. You don't want to actually hit your zipper. But thinking about it like that really helps to get in a position like you're hiking football between each swing. Next slide. So Patrick and Jacob showed you some of these. We'll go on to the next slide. So I'm going to show you a little bit of the research and biomechanics of doing kettlebell swings. This is just showing the importance of lifting properly and keeping the kettlebell close to your body like I talked about earlier. So basically, conceptualized by a picture of a stick figure lifting a box. This is the tension on your spinal erector muscles, which are like your lumbar spine and lower back, which can be commonly injured by not lifting properly. So this guy who's holding the kettlebell far out in front of him with his back arched has about twice the load placed on his spinal erector muscles as a guy who's just holding it in a good position with a neutral spine. And as you squat down, the load increases a little bit, but it's still not quite as much as the guy lifting with bad form. And then you can just see other things like laying. You're not going to do kettlebell swings like that, but so I just thought this was interesting, and something that we talk about a lot here with a lot of different exercises is keeping a good position and keeping a neutral lumbar spine. And it really is important, and you really put yourself at risk for injuries if you don't lift properly. Some of the muscle activation during kettlebell swings, can get pretty deep, and there are like a lot of specific muscles that they looked at the activation of during kettlebell swings. But the three main groups are, what is this?
Looks good.
There we go. Back, abdominal muscles, and thigh and glutes. So this is throughout the range of the kettlebell swing from the start till the end, where it's just above their eyes in this study. And I don't know, I've heard people ask a lot, well, what muscles am I working? So it's basically these three main muscle groups, which encompass most of your body. Kettlebell swings are more of a pulling movement than pushing, so you won't get as much of your front, but definitely back, glutes, and core muscles. Next slide. So as Patrick talked about, you can use kettlebell training to increase your heart rate as a substitute for other types of heart rate training like running or rowing or swimming. And basically they compare this to jogging on a treadmill by matching the person's VO2 doing the kettlebell swings. And in that situation, the person doing the kettlebell swings had a significantly higher heart rate throughout the whole time period of working. And I just thought this was really interesting because before I started looking at this stuff, I never really thought of using kettlebells or weights as a way to do cardio. And as a lot of us know, running isn't necessarily the most fun thing ever. I think we all like lifting weights though. And yeah, you can all relate, I'm sure. Next slide. So some important points about doing kettlebell swings. Here, I probably could have exaggerated it a little bit more, but this is how it should look at the top of the full American kettlebell swings. You can see my ears in front of my arms. We talk about that a lot here. My back is straight and basically in a straight line with my core tight and my rib cage not flaring out. Here I'm more hyperextended and my rib cage is flaring out, not keeping my core tight, and that could lead to injury. This is a little bit more extreme of a case. She's also kind of letting the kettlebell droop at the top of the swing, which shows that she's probably using her shoulders to lift the kettlebell up. And that can be a problem for people who are just learning how to do it, kind of doing it like a squat and a shoulder raise like this, and that just feels wrong when you're doing it. If it doesn't feel efficient, and if you don't feel like you're transferring power into the kettlebell with your hips, then you're probably doing it wrong. If you guys try this, I wish we had time to all do this, but if you try this by yourself and you really exaggerate the hip movement, you can feel transfer of power from your hips to the kettlebell. And then showing how your core is basically like an interconnected group of muscles that goes around your entire torso. Keeping that tight really helps with stabilizing your body during the kettlebell swing, and since there is so much movement, it's really important to keep that tight. And your lower back muscles, which also are part of your core, that wraps around your entire torso. I just wanted to highlight that with that picture. So, all right, now one-handed kettlebell swings. Jacob and Patrick, you guys are up again. Thank you for, you don't have to keep those. So, starting with the kettlebell at a 45-degree angle on the floor, rather than straight across like two hands. You can't really see that picture very well, but it's kind of like a hook grip, except kettlebell handles are typically a little bit wider. So you grip with your thumb over your fingers. So you guys can try that. And it's the same thing as a two-handed kettlebell swing, except you want to try and stay square. You're not like letting the kettlebell pull you over. And a little bit more balance is involved with this than with the two-handed kettlebell swing. Do it again. You can do them continuously like before. Good. And then you can go and grab it with two hands in the middle of the swing. Good. Do a few two-handed. was gonna say switch, but you already switched. There we go. So a good way to start doing these when you are learning how to do them is start one-handed, then go to two-handed when it's at the apex of the swing. Do a few two-handed, then switch to one-handed. And then if you guys are comfortable, you can switch hands at the apex of the swing. There we go. Yeah, so you don't really want to have both hands off it for too long, but Patrick likes to show off. So things to avoid: having your hand on your hip when you're doing it. That can kind of be a substitute for keeping your core stable and being balanced overall. So you really just want your hand kind of out in front, and you don't want to have your hand just as like dead weight as you're going. It should move as you move. So this is similar to what we just did. It's a simple workout. I'm doing an even amount of, the T is for two-handed. So 4 two-handed, 4 left-handed, 4 two-handed, right-handed, two-handed. Most people pick that up pretty quickly, but you may have some problems switching between hands if you haven't done it before. Next one, yes. So walking kettlebell swings. Patrick, can you demonstrate this real quick? Sorry, it's just if you both did it, you might collide. So basically, you're letting the forward momentum of the kettlebell pull you one step each time, alternating feet each step. Good. Yeah. And you could do those one-handed as well. It's a little bit more difficult, but this is something you could throw in a workout if you're doing something like lunges or sprints or whatever across this gym. You could add in walking kettlebell swings, moving across. There are a bunch of different situations where you want to do a moving exercise. Next one. Lunging kettlebell swings. Okay, so it might be a little hard to do in jeans, but basically you use the hand that's next to the foot that's lunging so that it travels with your leg and your knee, so you don't hit yourself in the kneecap. But basically, you're lunging and then stepping back up. You can switch hands. But you guys get the point. These are the basic variations of kettlebell swing where you're still doing an actual swing, and we'll move into maybe next slide. Steer swings, doing two-handed with both kettlebells. So use the same starting position. Your feet are a little bit narrower, but you might want to spread them out a little bit. Yeah. So your feet are going to be a little bit more narrow because you don't want to hit yourself in the kneecaps again. But this is great if you want to use 2 kettlebells. There are also 2 kettlebell or double kettlebell cleans and press, which we'll show that in a second. So with the kettlebell clean and press, you guys will do this again too. It's a variation of a kettlebell swing, and it's different than the barbell clean and press that we've learned here, which is basically moving straight up. With a kettlebell clean and press, you guys want to do this? So you're doing a swing just about to eye level, so do a few of those, you guys. And then basically, once it gets just about above your shoulders, you pull it into yourself, and then get it into a position where it's wrapped between your bicep, forearm, and shoulder. I'm going to try. So you're just pulling it close to yourself right here. So it's still like a swing. You're doing it more like a regular barbell thing, yeah. So do a few swings first, and you can kind of get to the point where the kettlebell is like loose in the air. So it's like let it droop a little bit, and then just pull it there. You didn't get it into the full rack position, but we don't have enough time to like hammer it out right now. But you get the idea. Is that it's a variation of a swing. Yeah, I know it's high pressure. Don't worry. Next one. So kettlebell snatches, still a variation of the kettlebell swing. You're going a little bit higher than before, letting the kettlebell kind of droop at the top still, and then it's just pushing through at the top. Patrick, can you try this? You can try it. I think this might be a little easier than
Yeah. So you're going up a little higher. There you go. Try and find the point where it's weightless. There you go. And so you're catching with your arm all the way straight. Other than that, you got it. Amy, next slide. Bottoms up press. So because of the way the kettlebell is shaped, you can hold it straight up and use your grip to stabilize the kettlebell. This is a lot different than it looks if you haven't tried it before. So you might want to try this after. Yeah, be careful. So basically you're just stabilizing it like this. It feels really wobbly though. And press overhead. You want to look at the kettlebell while you do it. Otherwise it could come down on you.